So, as you know, if you've been watching this show for several months, since the show began, we've interviewed UK and European Parliament politician Nigel Farage a number of times about the crisis in Europe. He's talked about the lack of democracy in Europe, the rise of technocracy, and predicted a country like Greece was headed towards some kind of revolution. For years, though, since the early 1990s, when Farage was a founding member of the UK Independence Party, he has been a Eurosceptic, pushing for the UK to pull out of the EU altogether. For years, he was a lone voice in European Parliament, calling the eurozone project a disaster, and people laughed at him. Now, he says, not so many people are laughing. And the numbers support that. Farage's party did the best it's ever done in recent UK local elections, seeing a major rise in support. And what we've seen in Greece looks akin to some kind of revolt against incumbent mainstream politicians, at least at the polls, with an increased support of fringe parties opposed to EU-prescribed austerity. Now, this has increased the prospects that a real government won't be able to form at all, and Greece will be sent back to elections, which we've talked about all week. Farage, in his speech to European Parliament today, talked about his view of what could possibly be a much more dire consequence.
In Greece, what we saw last Sunday was rather reminiscent of the German election of 1932. We saw the status quo centre collapse and the extremes of right and left rise. You know, this project could even cause the rebirth of National Socialism in Europe.
It's a bold statement. We asked him about it, and needless to say, that aside, Greece has become the poster child for the EU's political and fiscal medicine. But the recent election results and the subsequent rhetoric from new political leaders would seem to indicate the patient is finally spitting up this so-called cure. We talked to Nigel Farage today. Again, he's leader of the UK Independence Party, fresh off of a Europe Day speech in European Parliament, where he's also an MEP. I asked if he thinks this is an important turning point for a country like Greece and for the EU, or if he thinks Eurocrats in Brussels will just find another way, some way, working alongside their viceroys in deficit countries to keep Greece under their thumb. Here's what he said.
A democratic rebellion has begun. We saw last year in Finland a small anti-Euro party getting 20% of the vote, and it's spreading southwards now. And what you saw in Greece on Sunday was truly extraordinary, because since 1945, Greek politics has been dominated by a conservative party and a socialist party. Those two parties that have run the country since the war were reduced to less than a third of the vote. And what we saw were voters opting for the extremes of right and left, and in some cases, very extremes of right and left. And I tell you something, I was reminded of the German election of 1932, when the communists and the National Socialists had 51% between them. Now, there is no prospect of a government being formed in Greece. There will be another election in June, and my money says that the more extreme parties will do even better second time round. So it doesn't matter what Angela Merkel says. It doesn't matter what the Commission say. People are rebelling. They do not want to be part of the eurozone. They do not want grinding austerity whilst their GDPs are declining hugely.
Okay, I want to get into a number of the things you just touched upon. First, I want to put this a little bit in economic terms, because we often talk about interest rates on this show, because we believe that they are one of the most basic signals in a market economy, yet they are constantly manipulated by policy at our various central banks in the US, in Europe, all over. The results are always a distortion of the free market price mechanism, and it seems that the same has been holding true with respect to democracy in Europe. The price mechanism of the electoral process of the vote has increasingly been dominated by technocrats, or placed in the hands of technocrats, who in the case of Greece are also not coincidentally central bankers. Could we say that the Greek elections, which you say are a rebellion, or are the equivalent of market forces overtaking the price fixing of democracy?
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, don't forget that just 10 months ago, the elected Prime Minister of Greece, Mr. Papandreou, suggested there should be a referendum in Greece to decide whether they stayed in or left the euro.
That's right.
Now, to the bully boys in Brussels, that was like blasphemy. And amazing, isn't it, that an elected Prime Minister was removed by the European Commission and my old friend Herman Van Rompuy, and they put a puppet government in place. Is it any wonder that the peoples of Greece are rebelling?
So then, you know, we're hearing already, Mr. Farage, reports that eurozone officials are debating delaying or withholding the bailout money that's due to Greece on Thursday because of the political turmoil. Does this mean that these threats are becoming more and more insignificant?
My guess is that the short-term bailout money will be provided by the institutions in Brussels. Listen, you've got to understand one thing. I met Angela Merkel last November, and I said to her Chancellor, wouldn't it be better for the people of Greece to leave the euro, get the drachma back, and wouldn't it be kinder for your taxpayers who've already spent 20 years paying for the reintegration of Eastern Germany into Western Germany? You know, let's call it quits. Let's say the whole thing's been a terrible mistake, and let's divorce the two countries economically. And she said, but Mr. Farage, you must understand that if Greece leaves the euro, other countries will leave too, and that will be the end of our European project. And that's what it's about. This is about the maintenance of a political dream. Even though it's out of date, even though the economics are failing, that is what they're determined to do. So there's this real battle going on. My guess is, for the moment, they will get the bailout funds, but at some point in time, this Greek rebellion will go further.
Well, that's my question, because when you're talking about the market suppression of democracy in the name of what you just said was the dream of the Euro project, is the result, when the free market takes over, what we're seeing in Greece, the radicalization and the balkanization of a country, which you pointed to, where mainstream parties, the support for them is reduced, and fringe parties see larger support, and you just have a total fracturing of support for political parties across the spectrum.
Yes, I think that's right. You know, at some point in a not too distant future, we are going to get a government in Greece who are going to utterly reject austerity in a way that will make the break between the two happen. The differences will become irreconcilable. Greece is going to leave the euro. I can't tell you when that's going to be. My guess is it'll be in 2012. And I would think if we come back in 2 or 3 years and have this conversation, the eurozone will look completely different. It will in effect become a Northern Europe greater Deutschmark zone.
Wow, and you say you do believe Greece will exit the eurozone, but you don't have a timeline. Is there anything that you would pinpoint that you think would be a turning point, or are we seeing it now?
Listen, if I had a timeline on when Greece leaves the euro, I wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be down at the local bookmakers putting my money on. You know, you can never predict when these things are going to happen. I mean, you know, sorry, trouble with the earpiece. You know, I mean, you know, it was obvious that the Berlin Wall would fall, but who could tell on which day it would happen? This Eurozone project is a total and utter disaster. It is coming to an end. I know it's coming to an end. I was on my own saying that in this Parliament 4 or 5 years ago. I tell you what, there aren't so many people laughing at me now.
And, you know, I do want to get to the rising support you've seen within the UK, too. But first, you mentioned the Berlin Wall. Earlier, you talked about German elections in 1932. Yeah. You compared these Greek elections to those. Now, of course, in German elections in 1932, the Nazi Party, that was the first time that they gained the largest amount. They became the largest party in Parliament. In your speech today, you said in the European Parliament, you also said that in this interview, that we could see the rebirth of National Socialism in Europe now. Is this because you're concerned about the vote that we've seen go to the neo-Nazi Golden Dawn Party in Greece, winning them seats for the first time ever in Greek Parliament? They got 21 out of the 300 seats. Yeah. I mean, look, there is an upside to voters rejecting the failed parties that have given them Europe, that have given them the Eurozone. There is a huge upside to it, but there's a downside too. And I mean, this Golden Dawn party that have got all of these votes in Greece are frankly, there's no avoiding it. This is a neo-Nazi party and a very dangerous party. And one of the ironies of the European project is that the project that was set up to make us all love each other
other is actually beginning to make us hate each other. And the Greeks now slag off the Germans, and they have cartoons of Angela Merkel wearing swastikas, and the German tabloid newspapers like Bild say the Greeks are all lazy, feckless and useless. And far from Europe coming together, Europe is being torn apart, and we are risking stirring up the very kind of nationalisms that the project was supposed to stop in the first place. I mean, look, communism was like this. Communism was supposed to make the world a fairer place, and you finished up with a brand new class system in Soviet Russia where the party members had even greater rights than the aristocracy that had gone before them. It is the law of unintended consequences.